Hello and welcome back to the Modern Leader Way podcast. I'm joined today by the lovely Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
So happy to have you on. Sarah and I actually met in a networking group a few weeks back,
That's
and
right.
Sarah reached out and said, "Oh, I'd love to come on the podcast," and explained why. And I was like, "Yes, I think this is a really important topic to bring to the table." So Sarah Faulstroh is an ADHD success coach working with entrepreneurs and professionals. And she's got a story behind this because she had a later diagnosis of ADHD herself. So we're going to get into her story, and that's going to come back to how she's helping support others in the workplace. So the stage is yours. Why don't you give us a bit of background, a bit about who you are and like how you've ended up doing what you do
I'd
today?
love to, Emma, and thanks for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So, well, my background is in leadership development and management. I've worked in a whole range of organisations over the years, although I don't think I've had a very typical career path because I've been in I started in corporate, blue chip companies, British Rail back in the day. And then I've worked in small consultancies, I've worked in a self-employed basis, and I've worked as an associate. So, and all the time focusing on people development. So I think the thread has been people development. But when I look back, I think the times when I've really thrived are when I've had freedom and variety. I lived abroad for quite a while as well. So that theme of people developing, helping, that joy of seeing people develop the confidence and realizing what they can do themselves has been a real focus for me and a real theme. And I realized the other day that, and this, I think, I realized this way before I knew or was diagnosed with ADHD, that when I was running a training course or in the training room and the door shut, I was in my element because I was only doing one thing. I could focus on it. I could respond to the people. I was helping them. And I could say what I liked, to be honest. So there was nobody breathing down my neck. And it just worked well for me. And yet, then when I started having to juggle multiple things and it's to prioritize, that potentially is when I struggled.
Mm. I love that. So you talked about like you're in this room and then you've got the freedom to kind of just do your thing, right? You bring what your A game because you know
Yeah,
what you're
yeah.
all about. So you've got this experience from like working with all these different companies, and you also obviously had some travel in your life as well. At,
Exactly.
at what point did you start to suspect that you potentially had a behavioral kind of ADHD diagnosis without the diagnosis? Like, talk
Yeah,
to us about that kind
absolutely.
of realization.
That's really interesting because I think certainly when we lived in France, so we were there for 11 years, I was learning lots of new things. Children were born there, so there was a lot going on and a lot of new things. So it was really interesting. It was really stimulating. When we came back to Britain, it was great. I found a job back in corporate in a big organisation, and absolutely loved it initially. The connection was great. It was fantastic being part of something. I brought all this energy and enthusiasm to it, and little by little, as I needed to be doing more things all at once and faster, and sometimes with vaguer deadlines or vaguer scopes, things started being a little bit more challenging. And end of my 40s, early 50s, the dreaded menopause hits. Thanks to some of my lovely colleagues for giving me a kick up the bum and getting me to see the doctor and onto HRT, which helped. But then there were other layers. It was like almost layers of an onion. There was anxiety there. There was menopause, and I'm that sandwich generation. So elderly parents, dad unfortunately was end of life. Teens also neurodivergent, so quite a lot of experience of navigating the system, which is really, really tough. School refusal, all that sort of stuff. And so I think it was lockdown when my youngest, who was about 10 or 11 then, really started struggling with just, okay, go into the room, do your work, come out. And I go in and he was staring at the floor or had one shoe on still. And so he got diagnosed. And the more I started looking into the symptoms and learning more about ADHD, the more I saw myself.
Mm. Oh my goodness, yeah, I can imagine that's the case. And lockdown, I guess it put us in this like container where we can just have to look at ourselves, right? And then you see more clearly what's going on around you, what you might not have seen as you've gone through like normal daily life. So in a way,
Absolutely.
I guess it's been a blessing to put the focus on and actually come out with like this new awareness about what's going on. Um, I think that's probably been the case for a lot of people. So obviously you like I know you'll sit there and say I'm no expert, but you know more than me and potentially some of the listeners out there. So talk to us about neurodivergent
Yeah.
neuro I can't even say it, neurodivergence
Yeah.
and because it's gaining popularity, I would say, in
Yeah.
terms of like
Yeah.
there's a lot more information out there.
A lot
Um,
more awareness of it
a
now,
lot
you're right.
more awareness, yeah, and
Yeah.
a lot more
Yeah.
people saying, I feel like I might be
Yeah.
neurodivergent
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah.
and a lot more services that are popping up to support people in that way, a lot more um allowance and adjustment for kind of the different ways that people think. So
Yeah.
if you were to like just summarize what we're talking about, what we're looking at with neurodivergence,
Yeah.
how do you describe it? How do you like to?
No, that's a massive question. And I think my experience overall is very much my lived experience of ADHD.
Mhm.
My sons are ADHD and one has autism as well. It's really interesting in terms of how things overlap. So
Mm,
when you look, and they used to think, I think only a few years ago, they used to think that you couldn't have ADHD and autism. So it was either one or the other.
right.
And in fact, even now, if you go for a private diagnosis, in effect, you choose. So it's like saying, oh, I'm not sure. It's almost like doing a Cosmo test. Well, which do I have? I think I'm more this than this. So I'll pay a small fortune and see what they come up with.
Right.
Finding a psychiatrist or an organization that will look at the whole person and the issues they're having is incredibly difficult.
Wow.
So both for adults and for individuals. So and it's interesting, you use the term neurodivergence because neurodiversity is all of us. It's the
Mhm.
different ways of thinking. Neurodivergence is a difference from the norm, from social norms, ways of thinking, ways of doing things. And I think a lovely way of describing it is that people who are neurodivergent, just check myself on it there, have what's called a spiky profile. So whereas the typical profile is that people can do most things reasonably well. Okay, so that might be at work, it might be day-to-day life, functioning, friendships, all sorts of things. They're
Mhm.
fairly steady, you know what to expect. With somebody who's neurodivergent, they'll be fantastic at some things
Mhm.
and lousy at others.
Right.
So, for example, losing things. Now, some of the listeners out there might be thinking now, well, hang on, that's menopause, isn't it? Or I do that. And I think it's really tricky because yes, and incidentally, hormones can play a massive role in this. So hormones can exacerbate ADHD symptoms, both in younger girls and during the menopause. Obviously, well, not obviously, but stress can also exacerbate things. I can talk about that more later on. Um, and I knew I'd do this, Emma. I've lost track of the question.
That's all right. So you were
That's
sort
very
of saying
typical.
neurodiversity versus
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
neurodivergence, and then you were saying when
The
funny
spiky.
enough, you can lose track of what you were doing.
Yeah. So spiky profiles.
Yeah.
So and that can be a huge problem in the workplace, because job descriptions usually require you to do a lot of different things pretty well. The other thing, and I think this is often why you get a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who are neurodivergent. God, I've done it again. I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Is that because they're entrepreneurs because they can't cope in the workplace that has that kind of load of expectation on them?
There are those expectations, yes. We'll come back to it. It'll come back to me later. Don't worry. So yes, that's what I was going to say. I think a lot of the neurodivergent way of thinking often is actually quite strategic, because one of the strengths is to see how things interrelate and how things all join up. So instead of just thinking we're going to do this and this is, we'll just plod along and do that because that's what we've been tasked with doing, the neurodivergent person in the room is probably going to be the person saying, why? How does this link to something over there? Have we considered this? What about this? Is this the root cause of it? Why? I've been asking that since I was about 11 years old, and I never realized why. It's that desire to actually make a difference, to ensure that the work you're doing is of value, and to really understand how it fits and what's the purpose of it. So one of the great strengths is that when somebody who, certainly with ADHD, is onto a topic that they love, that they believe in, that matters to them, they are unstoppable.
Love that.
So when you think of people like Emma Watson, she has ADHD and she's passionate about making a difference. She's not going to stand by and put up with people saying, well, that's the way it always is, tough. She will be out there. People with ADHD are often, and I don't want to generalize, very courageous. I've been called brave a lot in my life, whereas I'm just thinking, well, I can't just not say anything. Why is nobody else saying something or acting? It's obvious it needs sorting out, so I'll wait in there and sort it out.
Yeah,
so
brilliant.
that drive to actually do something, make a difference, can be absolutely huge. On the other side, the downside. So they are some of the spikes in these dips. If we don't care about it, can't see the point of it, it ain't going to get done. And it's really odd, because no matter how hard you try, and I'd said to my manager multiple times in the past, yeah, I'll do that. I know it's important, I'll do it. And I just didn't. And I can't explain why, because I intended to, I wanted to, but either the task was just one that I was poor at, that I really struggle with. Estimating time. So when asked, how long is that going to take you? You might as well be asking me that in Greek. I have no idea. I don't know even how to begin to conceptualize that idea in my head.
Okay.
And that's hard for people to get. That can be quite hard. I get overwhelmed by really simple things. So the routine things that neurotypical people can do, keeping the house tidy, tidying away washing, putting washing through, washing will go in the machine and stay there. It will go on the line outside and it rains for the week that it's out there because I've forgotten about it. Putting things away it's such a strange thing to say, Emma. I almost feel embarrassed about it, but it's exhausting. And that sounds, as I say, it's sort of, oh my God, how can I say that? And with that goes a degree of shame of, I'm bright, I'm intelligent. How can I possibly struggle with this? Why is this so difficult? What's wrong with me? And I think that, yeah, that hidden shame, guilt, sense of not being enough, massive one for people with ADHD is often, I'm not reaching my potential. I know I could do more, something's holding me back.
That's all fascinating. And I know we want to talk about specifically how women and girls might experience it slightly differently to their male counterparts. But I wonder if we just continue on the thread of your story, which was like I'm interested in what happened, like how you transitioned from actually learning that you now had this diagnosis, understanding more about it, and transitioning into and adjusting to life, I guess, with this knowing.
Yeah. Not very elegantly, I think. So getting diagnosed was hugely validating. It was a huge relief. I think I'd always thought, what's wrong with me? My brain seems to be wired differently. Well, hey ho, it is. There's nothing wrong with me. I just think differently, and there are things I struggle with. And as I read, I realized I started to value some of the things I'm good at and recognize them in the past. So the fact that I would stand up for injustice, the fact that I I'm really sensitive. That's always been viewed as, oh, don't be so sensitive. Or when I was a little girl growing up in Yorkshire, oh, don't be so soft. So, you know, it's not a good thing. You hide your feelings, yet I'm very, very empathetic. So the diagnosis was fantastic from that point of view. It was very validating. I felt much better about myself, but I didn't have any tools to do things differently. So I explained at work what was going on and why and what I was trying to do about it. But my performance didn't improve. And so I fell back on my tried and tested approach of trying hard and working longer hours and trying harder and working even longer hours and working at the weekend. Not getting anywhere, my performance dropping more, because actually, and again, we can talk about this in terms of the way our brain works later on, but just in a nutshell, when you're under stress, I mean, we all sort of know this intuitively, but your thinking brain, which is sort of all up here, actually disconnects from your emotional side. And so the two things, under even a small bit of stress, we lose our creativity, we lose our ability to plan, to prioritize, to think things through, to be rational. We lose our ability to focus. And so you get into a vicious cycle, really. And things got worse. The harder I tried, actually, the worse it got. And I burnt out, I realise now, even though work said that burnout wasn't a medical thing that they could accept. Stress was okay, but burnout wasn't. And I took time off work for quite a long time, quite a few months. And I realised that the environment I was in and the way I was doing things, and also my dad was in the last months of his life, I couldn't do all this anymore and stay healthy. Something will give. So I chose, and, you know, ironically, the last months of my dad's life enabled me to choose to leave. And so I could have that freedom to spend the time with him. They were 4 hours away, so that was quite a juggle. I'm an only child. And so I threw myself into sorting out care for my dad. And the thing that was astonishing to me, because I'd really lost my confidence at work. I thought I was crap. I thought I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make decisions. Real burnout. The thing that was astonishing was that helping my dad, sorting out this incredibly complex situation of his deteriorating health, his dementia, getting care in place, coordinating the hospitals, I suddenly realised I was on my A game. I was brilliant at it. So I got people on board, I got buy-in, I was considering all the different options. That systems approach, I pulled it all in. And I felt energized and I felt confident. Ironically, in this, desperate situation with Dad, I felt great in a way, if that makes sense, because I was functioning so well, except I burnt out again. So what I realized was that what I need is to be in the right conditions. So it was a huge light bulb moment for me that I've got masses of strengths, but caring for Dad was all about purpose and something that mattered beyond, I think, anything, other than my children, the family thing. I was able to be present. I was able to be there in the moment, and I overdid it. So I learned a couple of things. A, that the environment and the meaning and the freedom as well to do it my own way helps me thrive. It brings out the best in me in a way that it's almost like having, a bird in a cage. So some birds will be fine in that cage. If you put a canary in a cage, it'll cope. If you put a falcon in a cage or an albatross, you will not see that albatross thrive. It'll die. And it felt the same sort of thing, the right conditions. And I realized I needed to do something dramatically different because my boundaries were absolutely terrible. I would give and give and give. And I think that's very common. As women, we are, whether it's expected or conditioned, the people pleasing, the giving, the supporting others. So I learned that looking after myself is not a luxury. And God, that's a hard lesson for us, isn't it?
Isn't it just? Yeah. And how old were you at this point?
I was 54.
Okay. So you'd had your diagnosis, you'd burnt
Yeah,
out at work, you had that kind of time with Dad and
yeah,
burnt out again. And then it was at that point that you were like, something's got to change. I've got to put myself first. I've got to put some strong
exactly.
boundaries in place. And you had all this like new information about not
Yeah,
just the diagnosis, but where you're like, what makes you tick. And you
exactly.
could see it really clearly. So is
Yeah.
that what is this work you're doing now? Is that what you did next? Is that what came out of this?
I think in a way, I've been thinking of that whilst Dad was ill, and I was surprised with myself because I'd always tried hard and sat at a desk to come up with ideas, and yet my website evolved. I think it was actually a useful focus when I was immersed in all this. It was actually something for me, and it took me away from this, deeply emotional, exhausting situation. Um, and and so it developed, but I realized as well, as I learned more about ADHD, I realized that when you look at people throughout history who've made a difference, they're pretty much all neurodivergent. So Leonardo da Vinci, Newton, and just to be clear, I'm not putting myself up with them, Not yet, not yet. I might get there. They've and the people that now that are great sports people, stand-up comedians, people who sort of break the mold. They don't just follow the ways of doing things, have done fantastic things. And I think this different way of thinking, whether that's autism, whether it's ADHD, whether it's dyslexia, because neurodivergence, you mentioned it before, but I didn't, you asked before, I didn't mention, it's things like dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, I didn't even know existed, it's trouble writing. They're all different types of neurodivergence, and society focuses on the deficits.
Yep.
And the differences, I feel really strongly, they are not deficits. And people are affected to different degrees. Some people are really badly affected, and it affects their ability to function. The rates of suicide with people with ADHD are shockingly higher than in neurotypical people. If you look in prisons with young offenders, there's a massive percentage of people with ADHD. And there's a lot of work going on at the moment to actually screen people, say for minor offences, to see if they do have, because clearly just shoving them in a jail and limiting everything, and they've no idea what they need and no understanding, because we seek excitement. ADHD is a sort of lack of dopamine in the brain. And so the dopamine level is lower. This is a massive simplification. So that in order to get it to a level where you have a sense of gratification and reward, which is what dopamine does, you need to do something different or quite exciting. So driving fast, taking drugs, alcohol abuse, teenage pregnancies, risky behavior, they're all almost a coping strategy of, I need to get my dopamine up. Caffeine, alcohol, cigarettes, any stimulants raise up the dopamine, and now I can function.
Right.
So what happens there is you get loads of people with ADHD in the blue light, not industries, what they call services, because great in a crisis, suddenly laser focused.
Brilliant.
And I've forgotten your question again.
No, you were talking about the strengths you were getting on, and I think the question was that everything that you learned through the burnout and putting yourself first and understanding more about your strengths led you to doing the work you're doing today.
Exactly. So thank you. So I feel incredibly passionately about the fact that there are loads of people who walking around thinking, I could do more, but I'm trying hard, but I just can't make it happen. And my God, that's a hell of a waste. We've got some serious problems in the world at the moment: climate, wars, conflict, society, food. And standard ways of thinking aren't necessarily going to solve these problems. But if you have ways of thinking which are systemic, which are to do with connection, which are to do with, oh, hang on, somebody over there said this and that, and what about this? And get people together and use the whole input from a wide range of people, rather than this sort of command and control, old-fashioned thing that we still have in schools, in a lot of industries, I think that makes a massive difference. That has the potential to make such a huge difference to society, to organizations, to the world. I know it seems a bit idealistic. I've always had this burning desire to make things better, for people to be happier. It just seems such a waste. You know, you see people who've got so much potential in them and they don't believe in themselves, or they don't know how to work, or they've got beliefs about themselves because of all this conditioning of you're not allowed to ask questions, you're not allowed to be angry, you're not allowed to. So a lot of the talked about the difference perhaps in women. It's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Right, that's nice. So let's smash a few myths.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah. Attention deficit, absolutely rubbish. It's a surfeit of attention. I cannot turn off my attention. So I see everything. There's a theory, the author's called Thomas Hartman, that ADHD created hunters in the past. So when we were hunter-gatherers, ADHD was incredibly useful, because actually if it's still in our genetics, and it is hugely genetically linked. So if you have people in the family or a parent or children, there's a high likelihood. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So it was really useful because the people with ADHD would be the ones spotting things or spotting danger. It's like being hypervigilant. Now that's great in the blue light services. It's not so great if you're in an office and the light's buzzing and nobody else can hear it, or it's a bit too hot, or somebody's clicking a pen. And suddenly it's like having spidey senses. It can become incredibly irritating. You can sort of see it in me as I talk about it. And it can lead into anxiety as well with that. So again, I've forgotten the question. Help me on, put me on track
Oh, you're
again.
talking about so we were sort of shifting into women. Oh, and you said
Yeah,
attention
so,
deficit. And
yeah.
I wonder if you have a better name for it.
That's a good point. So hang on, let's just get with the hyperactivity
Go on
first.
then.
So
Yep.
hyperactivity, it's typically your little boys jumping around the room, etc., etc. Hyperactivity often shows up in girls as in the mind.
Right.
So or it might be sort of little things or little, sort of bit of fidgetiness,
Mm-hmm.
or there are three types of ADHD. One is hyperactive, impulsive, one is inattentive, and one is combined.
Right.
So hyperactive is typically very, very active, maybe clumsy, you know, very, very talkative, very, very chatty, sort of on the go, loads of energy, very obvious energy. Impulsivity can be things like buying too much, drinking too much, saying yes to lots of things, taking on a lot of projects,
Mm-hmm.
never finishing them. Never done that. Hyperactivity can always, as I said, always also be in your mind, which makes it really difficult to relax and shut off because there's always something there. It's like, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. And there are ways you can deal with that. The disorder, I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's a way of thinking that doesn't fit very well with a lot of the way we do things these days. Because often, if you're outside, if you have more freedom to do things, if you have more choices, if there is more connection, more spontaneity, then those are some of the keys to thriving.
Mm-hmm.
But doing the same thing like a robot, because the opposite of hunters are farmers. So, farmers are needing for society to do the same thing, day after day after day to keep things running.
Mm-hmm.
For an ADHD brain, that can be agonizing, absolutely agonizing. And it sort of, it stops functioning, or it starts looking for dopamine. Oh, there's a fly. Oh, what about that? Or it's looking to make connections and get some sort of stimulation. So for girls, we learn to mask, because a lot of these things, growing up, there's still expectations. Certainly, I grew up in the 80s. There are still those expectations of be polite, be kind, be quiet, don't get angry. Anger is not really, it's okay in boys.
Mm-hmm.
You might get more aggressive behavior perhaps showing up in boys, whereas girls, it goes inward and it turns into like self-doubt, anxiety, shame. And that has a massive impact on self-belief. And if it's not okay to bring up different ways of doing things or do things a bit differently because, oh, she looks a bit strange, we want to be accepted. Acceptance is huge.
And
Yes,
because it's so internal or internalized, I guess it's harder for other people to spot it, especially in young girls, right, that don't have the words to describe what's going on for them, or the awareness about something might be, there might be a reason why you feel this way.
you've hit the nail on the head. And even now, I think girls are less diagnosed
Mm-hmm.
than boys when they're at school. And there are a lot of women at sort of menopause and just before age being diagnosed. Hence, lots of headlines that say, oh, you can just go and buy a diagnosis. Bloody hell, you cannot. It takes ages to get diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's increased awareness, but also an increased awareness of these subtler signs.
Yeah, and actually, what I love about your approach is because someone very, very dear to me, a child, has is suspected of having ASD or being on that kind of spectrum.
Yeah.
And you know, when you love someone, it doesn't change who they are. It's just like, well, that's them. And
Exactly.
actually now we have, if this is the case, we have this awareness that we can support them just to thrive in being who they came here to be, who they
Absolutely.
are.
Yeah.
Without that, I think us growing up in the generation that we did, we had that, like, so many conditions put on us, and we're put in a box, and we're kind of almost like, through no fault of our parents, made to like shrink and just become almost shells of our like
Yeah.
actual natural self. And the
Yeah.
work that you and I have done in our adulthood is actually go, hang on a minute, this isn't who I really am. And I want
Absolutely.
to go on a journey of understanding who I am, like who I truly am. And then I will thrive. And then what we're doing is actually saying, and guys, everyone out there, you get to do this too. Like, let me show you a better
Yeah.
way to
Exactly.
exist in
Yeah.
this world that is
Yeah.
just catching on to some things, but really slowly.
Yeah.
And let's face it, there is still a lot of lip service. If we just look at what's gone on in like the LGBTQ community, right? There are, in some big corporations now, there are these big drives to support this community, yet
Yeah.
there is still a feeling that it's still lip service.
Yeah.
Similar with like the gender gap or different gender
Yeah.
diversity, right? It's like there's a lot of lip service, and
Yeah.
there is a long way for these big companies to fundamentally change their systemic
Yeah.
makeup to make it safe for all these different people to thrive as their, like, just their genuine
Yeah.
authentic selves, and for that to be okay, for that to come forward and to bring to the table whatever it is that they want to bring. And this is a big part of the modern lead, her identity, right? It's like she knows, she first of all knows herself. So, you know, the times that you were saying, there's, is there something wrong, or actually knowing what makes you like just ride with the wind and just really be productive versus know what switches you off. All these things is about part of that, getting to know ourselves, but know our true selves, not the self that was adjusted over time because we were put in this little box. And I've lost where I'm going with that. But modern leader, so she knows, likes, and trusts herself. And I think it's giving that empowerment back to the people, that when they know who they are, it's like they get to trust that that
Yeah.
is enough, and
Yeah.
actually that is what they need to bring to the table
Yeah.
to play the role they came here to play in this lifetime.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'd add something to that. You're talking about know, like, and trust. It's value as well. She values herself.
Mm,
You know, that you think, hang
yes.
on a minute, I might be different. And yes, I have some challenges. I think the huge difference for me now is I am really comfortable saying, I'm really good at these things. You know, I'm great at them and I love doing them. I will do them, you know, just I can't not do them. And there are some things I'm absolutely crap at. And I'm going to need some help with, because when you get me to do that and you expect me to do that and you put pressure on me to do that, I shrivel.
Mm.
It's like a plant in a garden, or I mean, the classic one, I can't remember. It might have been Einstein, I don't know, that said if you expect a fish to climb a tree, it's going to spend its whole life thinking that it's a rubbish monkey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sort of sums it up. We've been brought up, and I think you could say this probably for, maybe for women generally, but in particular, if you have a differently wired brain, we've been brought up with the wrong user manual.
Mm. Yeah. Elaborate on that a bit
I want
more.
to show people the right user manual,
So
because
yeah, I think this leads us nicely into like how you work with people,
yeah,
right? So tell us a little
exactly.
bit about that.
So I work with people sort of at three different levels. And what I've realized is that there are three things that you have to have in place if you want to really transform. Because it's very easy to think, I'm disorganized, I'll get a planner. And I think, you know, if there is anyone with ADHD listening, they've probably been through a few planners in their lives. Because, you know, we try and organize things. In fact, I got very good at planning as a way of procrastinating, which is also perfectionism, procrastination, overwhelm. If these sound familiar, then, you know, you're not alone. So having strategies is one thing, and having the right strategies is really key, because it takes what I call cognitive load off your brain. So, for example, because typically people can be easily, so say if somebody is easily distracted, if I go from this room with my cup downstairs to put it in the dishwasher, I will see so many things on the way that, and they'll all grow. So I'll think of one, I'm doing one task, it'll spring into 5. Each of those branches springs into another 5. Before I know it, I've got 1,000 things I'm thinking of, and all I meant to do was put the cup in the kitchen. So simplifying things is huge. Getting rid of stuff, simplifying your systems is massive, and having the right strategies. So, for example, my working memory, I've realised now, is at the root of a lot of my issues. So I get overwhelmed because I'm trying to hold a lot of things in my memory. I do one thing, I see something else, I think of something else. I need to do that, I need to do that. Somebody asks me something and I'll fly off the handle. Whoa, what's going on? All it is, when I get to the root of it, and this is what I help people do, figure out, hang on, procrastination, why, what's going on? What is it? Is it a fear of not being good enough? Is it perfectionism? Is it you don't know how to do it? Is it's, you know, people say, well, break it into manageable chunks. But if you're not sure what to do, or if you're afraid of looking incompetent because of judgment in the past, that's the thing that needs gently unraveling as well. And I use emotional freedom technique with that, sometimes known as tapping, to gradually loosen those, and in a very safe way. So people think, oh, actually, I've accepted that emotion's there, but I've calmed it. EFT is brilliant for calming your nervous system. So instead of what we typically do, and this is a big thing for men will definitely sort of block emotions. Or they might come out in anger in some cases. With women, it goes internally often. It'll be overwhelm, it'll be the shame. So strategies is one thing. But you talked about this before, Emma, about self-knowledge. You need to know. The way I like to think about it is, let's say you get a box and it's got a new piece of kit in it. All right, with that piece of kit, you're going to have an instruction manual. And that instruction manual, first of all, it's going to tell you what it is, what it does, how it works, so you understand it. What can you use it for? It's a bit like, you know, everybody else drives tractors. You've got a Ferrari. If you've got the instruction book for the tractor, you think your Ferrari is going to be towing a plough, working well in a muddy field, and going quite slowly. So you use those instructions and it's not going well. The second thing is you need to know how to look after it. So that's the second sort of key. And I think, as we talked about before, that self-care, that taking time, stopping, because actually that's what creates flow. Creativity comes when you create the space for it. It doesn't come when you think, I've got to be creative. What is it? What is it? It comes when you're in the shower, walking, on the loo, in the car. So how do you look after that item in the box, i.e. you? And the third thing is your strategies. How do you use it? But you need to know the other things. If you haven't got the self-awareness, you know, if you think your Ferrari's in a muddy field, well, there's no point knowing how to use it if it's in the wrong environment and if you're not using it for the right things. So the three things all come together. So I work with people. We start off with, what are your goals? Fairly straightforward coaching, but I look at specific, they're called executive function skills, the things that's like the CEO of your brain. So we look at what people need to put in place, but I look beyond that at the root cause, what's blocking them, and then those habits so people can keep themselves healthy and in top form, really.
Oh, and I can see like your journey interweaved in all of that you've come up with in this beautiful package
Yeah.
and solution. So I love that. Before we wrap it up, let's come back to that question that I threw in there at an inappropriate time. If you were to give ADHD a more
Yeah.
appropriate
Yeah.
name, what would it be?
Goodness me. Crikey. I think the word that springs to mind is different thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I can't sum it up. I think somebody did do something with the letters. It's often a systems thinking. It's tricky to sum up because it varies and shows up differently for people as well.
But I think if there's one thing I hear from you, it's that you want people not to see it as a disorder, but actually a superpower.
Not a superpower, no, because there are things that are a pain in the backside. And although I wouldn't not want to have it, it's held me back. And I know for a lot of people, it can be really disabling. It can be some of the root of addictions, of things that have made life really hard. Financial difficulties, of impulse spending. So no, I don't think it's a superpower. I think it's a difference that when harnessed and when there are strategies to minimize or support, I think we said before, we're both wearing glasses. The strategy, that's a strategy for helping us see better. I think strategies in terms of how you do things, simplifying things, being well organized, but in a way that works exactly for each individual, that's what liberates it. And that's what then unleashes the strengths and that hidden trap potential.
Love that. Where can people find you, Sarah?
They can find me. I think you're putting some links in,
I
aren't
will
you?
make sure the links are there, yeah.
So there are links that you can go to that Emma's going to put with this, but also I have a the keys to thriving with ADHD, not a worksheet, but a fact sheet, information sheet, which sums up some of the things we've been talking about today, and will give you some tips and quite a good way to assess, well, what's good, what's strong. I'm also offering a free 45-minute ADHD action plan chat for your listeners, the audience, and again, the link for that. So if you would like to think, well, I'm really blocked, I'm stuck, and I'm frustrated because I'm spinning my wheels, I'm not getting anywhere, and I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD, or I'm pretty sure I've got it. If you want some clarity, then I'd be delighted to talk to you.
Amazing. So I will ensure all the links to those are in the show notes, so go check them out. Sarah, thank you again for coming on and so beautifully sharing your story and being
Joy
so
talking to you,
open.
Emma. It really
Oh,
is. It really
brilliant.
is.
And until next time, guys, we'll see you then.